Please turn in your Bibles to Galatians chapter 6. And I'd like to read you verses 6 through 10. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption. But he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. Prepare for the future harvest. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. I'd propose to you that it says, be not deceived, so that there are here deceptions. What are those deceptions? How is it that you and I can become deceived? And I believe that this is certainly true of unsaved people, but I believe that even believers, even mature believers, even perhaps throughout our lives, many times in our lives, we can succumb to these traps, these deceptions, these things that are things that we should never be deceived about. So I want to give you what I believe are the four deceptions implied in this passage. And if you're taking notes, I'd really like you to write these down. And I want to give you the phrase or how I am deriving this deception from this passage. What is the rationale for that? And a question. And then I'm going to, after I give you these four deceptions from this passage, I'm going to run back through them and illustrate them and talk about them a little more. But I think the first deception is this. And I put lie number one. Is that God can be mocked without consequence. That's the deception. The lie is that God can be mocked without consequence. So if you can write that down if you're taking notes, or maybe you just want to try to remember these in your mind. And there's a question I want you to remember. Will you reap? That's the question. It is, will it actually occur? And the part of the verse is, God is not mocked. So the lie is that God can be mocked without consequence. The question is, will you reap? And the part of the verse is, God is not mocked. The second deception is that you can sow one seed and reap something else. You can sow one type of seed and reap something else. That's the deception. That's the hope, isn't it? That somebody can sow an evil seed but never reap that. In fact, the hope is that they would actually reap something good from sowing something evil. So the lie is that you can sow one type of seed and reap something else. And the question is, what will you reap? What will you reap? And for this lie, you can put sow to the flesh, ... flesh, sow to the Spirit, ... life. Okay? You reap what you sow. You don't reap something different. Deception number 3 is that the pleasure of the sin will outweigh the pain of the consequences. The pleasure of the sin will outweigh the pain of the consequence. And that is so typical, isn't it? That is what children wrestle with when they figure in their own mind whether or not I'm going to disobey or obey. Is the pleasure of the sin better than the pain of the consequence? And the question is, how much will you reap? And for this point, how do you derive that, Pastor, out of this passage? Sow, reap. Okay, you just put those two words, the whole idea of putting a little seed and then getting a great harvest from one seed, you know this multiplies. And so the pain of the consequences is much greater than the pleasure, the seed of the sin. And the fourth deception implied in this passage is that painful consequences will not occur because it has not occurred. In other words, the consequence will not occur because it has not yet occurred. And the question is, when will it occur? Now that is implied in verse 9. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in, what's the next word? Due season we shall reap. In due season we shall reap if we faint not. So those are the four deceptions. Now let's go back through them. Let's look at the first one. The first lie is that God can be mocked without consequence. Will you reap? Now, the image that comes to my mind is when Bob Jones III was before Congress, and he actually opened his Bible, and he wanted to read a verse, and he just heard all kinds of snickering and ridicule throughout. And that's what mocking means. Mocking means to turn your nose up at God and snicker. God is not mocked. And many people get confused about this because they say, well, if I'm lying, God strike me dead by lightning right now. And no lightning bolt. And God is thought to be, not thought to be active and merciful. He's thought to be non-existent. And that is the lie. The lie is that and this can come from, say, a Christian school teen. Here is a Christian school teen. He is surrounded by instruction, but often he is mocking God in his own life, in his own complacency with spiritual issues as a young person or as somebody that is surrounded by the gospel, and they're sowing to the flesh, and that by implication is mocking God, and there doesn't seem to be anything coming, and the lie is, well, God can be mocked without consequence. That's not true. The consequence just hasn't fallen yet. The consequence will fall. God will not be mocked. What you do sow, you will reap. God will not be mocked. And I think as Christians, we can even get this in our minds and in our own complacency. If we're somewhere in a private place and we think we can sow to the flesh and maybe we can get away with it, maybe we can somehow hide from God. Maybe God can be mocked a little bit. Maybe we can do this and get away with it. No. God, don't be deceived. God is not mocked. God is not mocked. The consequence is going to fall.